Hello, CanFiles viewers. This is Aidan Jonah, editor-in-chief of the Canada Files. I am here with a rather special individual. His name is Tynan Liebert. He is a QP activist in the electrical trades, organizer with the Communist Worker Circle and Labor MayDay Committee. Ty, thanks for joining the CanFiles.
It's a real honor to be here with you and your viewers, Aidan.
All right, Ty. So let's start with this straight away. Project Resolute and your situation. So let's actually talk a little bit first about Project Resolute. We saw this in the breach. There's a secretive committee, Ontario government. They want to punish pro-Palestine activists in Ontario. This extends from Hate Crimes Unit of Toronto Police Services, the Mayor's Office, Ontario Ministry of the Attorney General. So with that context in mind, you had a charge you faced in April and May. Can you talk about this first charge and the situation at a Palestine protest?
Of course. So I caught two charges for the cause of Palestine, specifically for protesting at a fundraiser of Chrystia Freeland's at an overpriced restaurant in a bougie Toronto neighborhood that
Sorry,
people from
Ty.
here
Ty,
might
I
know as
lived I lived in
Yorkville.
Toronto. Overpriced restaurant doesn't really help people identify.
Yeah, no, that's true. It's a I should have been. I said Yorkville though, so that'll
That's good enough for
that
the Toronto people.
yeah. Okay. Yeah, so Chrystia Freeland uh planned a fundraiser there, and word got out. There was a big protest, and it didn't go so well for her and her cronies. They ended up canceling the fundraiser. She didn't show up. And this was a real embarrassment to the Liberal government because Trudeau tried to meet up with Giorgia Meloni, a fascistic leader of Italy, not much like earlier that week, and that was also completely shut down. So we had this successful rally, spirited. I'd heard about it just a few hours before, and I just decided I could not miss a chance to protest someone like Chrystia Freeland for reasons maybe we can go into in a bit. And a month later, or more than a month later, I got a phone call, and I was told it was the police and that I was charged with assault. And I said, okay, I took down the guy's name and number, and I called back, and it was him. Like I went through all the standard what you'd do if you thought you'd got a prank call, and then I called the some people associated with the protest organizers, and they said, "Oh, this is what's happening. They're picking people up." So that was in the lead up to May Day, which is the main thing I do every year in politics, is I organize a communist and socialist-led trade union-based rally in Toronto. And yeah, shortly before that, I was notified by the cops that I'd been charged and would be put under arrest. But the timing with May Day might have been a coincidence. It was actually the U of T encampment was just about to get started, the protest encampment for Gaza. And I learned subsequently that a lot of people were getting picked up by the cops in advance of that. So the cops came by. They told me that all my firearms and my license would be confiscated. Like a lot of people that work in the trades and in Ontario, I'm a firearms owner, and I'm a proud firearms owner. I think it should be a right. So the cops made arrangements. They came by my place to arrest me and confiscate my firearms. We had a number of comrades there to film what was going on. I had union representation there as well. Very grateful for that. And I thought that was over and done with, and it was ridiculous. It was an assault charge because I didn't assault anyone. There's a video that blew up on the internet, posted by Karim Assad, and someone fingered me in the video. And I mean, people can see it. In particular, if you slow it down, you'll see I didn't touch anyone, but a bunch of people on the website, oh, that's Tynan Liebert, and eventually it led to a charge. Then we had our MayDay rally. That was a blast. Thanks to the support from the Palestinian organizations, and we put Palestine right up front. We had a video greeting from the Democratic Front for the Liberation of Palestine. To my knowledge, that's the first time a Toronto rally was directly addressed by a faction of the Palestinian armed resistance. Uh, a MayDay greeting from the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine was read at the demonstration. We got about 1,000 people, trade unionists, socialists, partisans of different national liberation struggles, especially Palestine. And then, at the end of the month, out of nowhere, I was coming back home with some groceries late at night, and the cops arrested me. They met me they were there in the lobby of my apartment, and I said, well, wait a minute, guys, didn't we do this already? And they said, we're not aware of any outstanding investigations, but we're here to arrest you for assault. And I said, well, who did I arrest? Who did I assault? Where and when? And they told me straight up they didn't know. Now, police are practiced liars. They're very good at it, but the police force is also a giant bureaucracy and, is subject to its own absurdities and internal processes. So, I don't know whether those guys knew or not. But as they told me I was under arrest for an assault, they did not know whom I was alleged to have assaulted or where or when. And they cuffed me in the lobby of my apartment. So it was not until I believe it was August or September that I learned that the second arrest was also for the March 5th anti-Freeland rally. So yeah, I was arrested twice for a March 5th rally, once at the end of April and again at the end of May.
Right. So, I mean, it's pretty remarkable to me to see you're facing, if I'm correct, two separate assault charges for the same protest, right?
Yes.
What is their justification there?
Well, they say I assaulted someone, or actually two people, in separate instances. And there is video evidence in the public domain that I did not. Now, this is common. It's part of Project Resolute. Actually, my situation is not nearly as bad as the situations of many other people who've been arrested.
So
So,
speaking of that, actually,
yeah,
though, I think Project Resolute is something that we should discuss in broader detail. So can you inform the audience about the broader scope? Who else? Who else is in similar situations to you or worse?
there's at least 90 of us. And why I say worse is there are people whose homes have been raided violently. The cops came by, roughed up their families. Severe. In my case, I mean, aside from being cuffed in the lobby of my apartment, which was, not I didn't have that in my daytimer. It was a bit of a shock. But no, other people have been roughed up, had their places of living flipped. There have been all sorts of provocations by the police, and the attempt is people have lost their jobs. They've lost their housing. Some of them are white collar professionals who are having their certifications reviewed. It's really been something. My case has not been on that level, at least not yet. And yeah, it comes from the hate crimes department. So I noticed that when the police had me sign the Form 10, the release, sorry, I speak the jargon now because I've been for people who haven't been arrested in Canada, there's something called a Form 10 where they come to you and you have to sign that as conditions of release. And you could see that it's the cops there from the hate crimes unit. So that's what
That reminds
Project
me, in terms of
Resolute
those
is.
restrictions, right? And such would be similar, like what happened to Charlotte Cates after her arrest in the spring. So that rings a bell. That rings a bell. So please continue.
Sure. So we're being arrested by the hate crimes unit. So the implication is that many of the people are, longtime activists who organize on the side of oppressed people. I mean, in my case, I'm a trade unionist. Uh, there are other arrestees in Project Resolute who are trade unionists. Others are anti-racist activists or people who organize on behalf of Palestine or other oppressed peoples. And in a cynical attempt to turn the tables, they're treating us like hate mongers. We're opposing a genocide being perpetrated by a fascistic regime that carries out the most brutal discrimination and apartheid on the basis of the perceived supremacy of a religious sect. And we're opposing that. Yet the ruling class and its operatives and thugs would point the finger at us to say that we are the ones who are being discriminatory and hateful. It would be funny if there weren't the if it didn't carry the consequences that it does. But it is a completely absurd and cynical contortion of what is actually happening, it's being perpetrated by the ruling class and its agencies, both to keep a lid on domestic dissent and to throw sand in the eyes of the public.
Right. So in terms of this rising repression by the ruling class, there's something to keep in mind, which is, of course, Sami Dune and the designation of them on the terrorist list. You see Operation Resolute. But then on the side of it, you see some shifts. Student workers for Liberation of Palestine, this group that's caught my eye. I think they're based more out of the GTA. Palestine Action Montreal, again, I think is something that needs to be emphasized. Having a Palestine Action in Canada as a whole is a big deal, and you need to have that in every province, in my view. So you are seeing that shift. So with the escalating repression, do you think the Palestine movement right now is prepared or taking the steps to prepare for this repression?
We're on our way. There's arrestee support work being done. There's a network. People are raising their voices more and more. Those articles from the breach. I mean, you've stepped forward to do this interview with me, which is part of advancing that cause. There was an interview by Jessa McLean over. She's got a podcast with a name like Blueprints for Disruption. She just interviewed two people from the arrestee support group. So okay, things are moving. There are unions getting involved. So people that have been arrested, like some of us are trade unionists, and the unions who have a stake in opposing all these arrests, whether the people are trade unionists or not, because the clampdown on civil uh, dissent is going to directly affects workers everywhere. Some of the unions, particularly the ones that have played more of a role for the Palestinian cause, are coming forward. There's discussions happening. The gears are turning there, but it looks good in that we're going to get some union support to oppose Project Resolute and campaign to drop the charges against all the arrestees. Because yeah, that's one thing that hasn't come into place yet is a full-fledged campaign to drop the charges. But there's steps in that direction.
Okay, so let's talk about your Palestine organizing in general, right? Of course, you referenced the DFLP speaking at the MayDay event. How have you advocated for organized labor in Ontario to engage with Palestine liberation? And what steps do you see needed going forward?
That's a great question. So, uh, starting with May Day, Operation Al-Aqsa Flood transformed Toronto May Day. So the rally that happened this year was the fifth annual rally. And this had been something, the May Day had been, it's in English Canada, it's not a thing. It's a bit ironic. May Day was developed as International Workers' Day, starting from protest from a movement in the United States. And now it exists everywhere in the world, pretty much except the United States and English Canada, where it's been very consciously undermined by the ruling class and by certain lackeys in the labor movement over the years. They've come up with patriotic diversion from May Day. They call it, everyone knows, right? It's Labor Day, rather than being based on the international solidarity of the working class throughout the world. Labor Day, though a lot of people celebrate, and I come out on Labor Day because I'm proud of my union and proud to be union and grateful for the wages, benefits, safety, and work conditions that organized labor has achieved over the years. Labor Day is nonetheless based on a chauvinistic block between workers in imperialist countries, specifically in the United States and Canada, um, against the international working class and oppressed nations abroad. So it's a flag waving rally. You don't see as much support the troops stuff anymore, and that's a nice development. But May Day is the day of the international working class, and the working class cannot unite around the world if it is not committed to equality among nations. Like one of the first things every trade unionist learns, either as common sense or in practice, is that if you don't treat people as equals, you can't unite your workforce. And it's not a question of just ignoring things like racial or patriarchy and pretending like they don't exist. You've got to actively counteract them. Because only if you do that can you overcome the divisions in the workplace and get everyone involved. And it's not just a burden, is when people get involved on that basis, it brings a lot more energy to what we got going. And that's true not just in the workplace, but on an international scale. That the international working class, in order to unite and in order to liberate itself, needs to take up the struggles of oppressed nations and peoples. And I mean, the Palestinian cause is the epitome of that. So this year, our rally was transformed. It was much larger, and that's thanks to Operation Al-Aqsa Flood. Uh, there have been huge rallies in Toronto, like in other major cities around the world. I mean, they're not, I don't want to say they're huge. They're not like, Yemen, you've got 1 million people. No, we, had tens of thousands. Um, but it's also caused a lot of people to check out the Palestinian resistance. So, I mean, in the communist workers circle and in some other socialist groups, people have started looking into the fact that there are Palestinian resistance factions that base their outlook and program on the international struggle against imperialism, against the same bourgeois system that the class conscious element of the workers' movement is fighting against here in the imperial core. And specifically, those are the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, which is on the Canadian state's so-called terror list, and the Democratic Front for the Liberation of Palestine. So people talk about labor solidarity with Palestine, and that's the first step. But when we do it, we have in mind that there are Palestinian organizations that are directly in solidarity with labor. It goes both ways. And an important distinction, and it's a class distinction, in the Palestine solidarity movement is, on one hand, between the middle class elements, if not by origin, then by outlook, for whom the Palestinian people are the object of charity. There's a dose of pity to how they don't support the resistance. They tend to really lean into the ceasefire slogan. I mean, and they want to stop the carnage, which is, I mean, this horrifying. There's a Holocaust going on. Any decent person wants to stop the carnage. But what they don't look into is that Palestinians are far more politically sophisticated than activists within the imperialist countries, and indeed within most countries. So there's an enormous tradition of Palestinian political struggle, not only against the Zionist entity, but among the Palestinian groups themselves. Like there, whether it's Fatah, DFLP, PFLP, the General Command, various splits of Palestinian Democratic Union that emerged from the DFLP, not to mention all the Islamists. Palestinians aren't just passive victims. They have developed through struggle and creative genius, frankly, their own organizations, their own political programs. And when they carried out the stunning military raid on October 7th, a prison break and an escape from a open air concentration camp, they sent a lot of people. I mean, out into the streets, yes, but at night we were in the books and at meetings, learning about the organizations involved. So it was very important that at MayDay that the politics be pro-resistance, not just neutral, or yeah, we want to stop the carnage, but not out of pity. We're working with the people of Palestine as our comrades, as partisans in a common struggle of liberation from the capitalist system, which is headquartered here in the imperialist heartland of the United States and Canada. So one of the things I want to emphasize is it was a recorded video greeting from the Foreign Affairs of the Democratic Front for the Liberation of Palestine. The comrade pointed out that workers in Palestine had all joined the resistance. So there's no such thing as labor solidarity with Palestine that is opposed to or indifferent to the resistance. Labor solidarity with Palestine, in order to be real solidarity, means solidarity with an armed resistance that is redeeming humanity in the face of genocide. And even though the Palestinian resistance is controversial in North America, and it's not difficult to find working class people who, far from identifying with it, even oppose it or buy into a lot of the misrepresentation from the business media here that resistance fighters, that freedom fighters are terrorists or whatnot. The truth is that, working people, even we value peace, but we're not pacifists. And, the thing about Al-Aqsa flood, about October the 7th, is there was nothing particularly radical or extreme or foreign about it. Is that if you take a people and you pen them in an open air concentration camp, subject them to terror bombing, which the Zionists obscenely call mowing the grass. Like they drop bombs on civilian targets every so often in order to reduce the population, to cull the population. And they're so indifferent to it that they call it mowing the grass. People are denied medical permits. I mean, sorry, a lot of your viewers know this stuff, Aidan, due to the excellent work that you and your other guests have been doing. But if you take the average, people from Canada or the United States or France or Japan or Germany or Argentina or Zimbabwe, and you put them in that situation, I mean, the people in Zimbabwe did rebel. If we were kept in an open air concentration camp like that, we'd rebel too. So there's nothing radical or extreme or even or foreign or even like necessarily Muslim about it. I mean, Hamas is a Islamist movement, but what happened there was completely normal. And I just want to point out,
What I would say there
if I
is just that obviously you have Islamic elements and you have socialist elements, and obviously there's been some historical tensions between the atheist, more so socialist movements, some of the religious socialists, and then non-religious socialists, right? But they have come together in the Palestinian resistance, and for that circumstance, that's the most important thing, at least in the immediate state.
Unity of all fields. That's right. It's very, you can see videos of the PFLP and the DFLP conducting joint operations with the Izzedine al-Qassam Brigade's military wing of Hamas and Soraya al-Quds of the Palestinian Islamic Jihad group. Absolutely. But the thing about Al-Aqsa flood, and that's really what's transformed. You've asked about Palestinian organizing here, and that's, I really want to talk about that because that, I mean, it's for Charlotte Kate's forthright remarks about Al-Aqsa flood that she's being targeted. And so that ties in with, and that Samidun has been terror listed. That ties in with the broader issues. And it's completely transformed the organizing I've been doing. So, I would point out that throughout history, there have been slave rebellions that have been quite brutal. If you go back through the annals of history, you'll find ones that even involve reprisals and even sexual violence. But Alexa Flood was not one of those. We've been subjected to all kinds of atrocity propaganda. There's talk of mass rapes and beheading babies. And it's been a year, and the evidence is still not there. And one after another, these atrocity stories have fallen apart and been exposed as lies. So Operation Al-Aqsa Flood, I mean, it was the furthest thing from the kind of like rampaging orgy that is portrayed in such a bigoted manner as by the capitalist media here. It was frankly a stunningly effective military raid. You look at what happened. I mean, the occupation force, the Zionist army, is said to be the most effective and the most moral army in the world. It's extremely well equipped and trained. And it's been exposed to be the opposite of both of those things by Al-Aqsa Flood. Like, what did a geopolitical commentator and military analyst, Scott Ritter, who'd be no stranger to viewers of the Canada Files, Scott Ritter said, Hamas beat Israel in a stand-up fight. And if you look at the kind of elite targeting of military facilities, they recovered intelligence, and that can't be done by a bunch of barbarians with their pants around their ankles, like, to be a bit coarse. Like, this was done by politically motivated, serious, organized, and well-trained soldiers who knew exactly what they were doing. I mean, the rave, this turns out, based on available information, that that it was rescheduled and that the brigades didn't anticipate it there. But what we've seen now from a number of sources is that many of the Israelis that were killed either at that rave or in the surrounding areas were killed by the Zionist forces themselves under the mandate of something called the Hannibal Directive, which has been documented extensively by sources not limited to Electronic Intifada, The Cradle, Mondo Weiss, and the Gray Zone. Something else that has to be said in discussions about Al-Aqsa Flood is that the strict demarcation between military and civilian targets that we're accustomed to making when we discuss war really does not apply the same way in the Zionist entity, which is heavily, heavily militarized. Like, there's a saying, most countries have armies, but Israel is an army that has a country. Just for starters, the kibbutz around in what is sometimes called the Gaza envelope are highly militarized and are actually integrated into the defense perimeter, like the same system that has a wall caging the Palestinian people in Gaza. Part of that wall and the backup to that wall are the armed settlers in the area. Also, just a enormous number of the seemingly civilian occupying Zionist population is in fact trained. There's reservists, people who are off duty, And not just regular soldiers either. Many of them are, a shockingly high percentage of them are actually commissioned officers. So yeah, with Al-Aqsa flood, I mean, you put any ordinary people in the situation the Palestinians have put in, they're going to revolt like that. Um, they're revolting against impossible conditions imposed on them by a highly militarized um, occupational force that's essentially disguised as a nation state. And if you look at how measured they were, I'm speaking of the freedom fighters now and how they conducted the operation. It was really commendable. That's like, I mean, Ritter calls it the most stunning military raid of the 21st century so far, and that's a tough one. I mean, I'm not an expert. I can't make that call, but based on available evidence, that's I mean, it was so much. Other military commentators actually thought it was a false flag, that something had been rigged so that it could prepare the ground for retaliation. But yeah, that was heard around the world, Operation Al-Aqsa Flood, and it is completely. I mean, everyone sees it. There was some Zionist commentator got all crotchety saying, Israel Palestine isn't a left right issue or an Muslim, non-Muslim issue. It's an age issue where young people are pro-Palestine. So you see around the world, you see people flooding into the streets, and many of them are young. And for me, who came to political consciousness as a teenager in the late '90s, uh, I mean, protesting in the streets for the cause of Palestine is nothing new, but it's the Palestinians have inspired us not just with their bravery as fighters, but also with their creativity as revolutionary thinkers and visionaries. So, we've gone back and studied the works of George Habash and Naif Hawatmeh and learned a lot from them and realized in the process that some of the positions we had as socialists and communists in Canada actually contained the taint of labor Zionism, that they were unduly soft on the Zionist entity. We thinking we were, being good Marxists by putting the class struggle first. But when you look at how the Zionist entity was set up and how the entire Palestinian population has been dispossessed and what it's going to take to defeat imperialism. I mean, a lot of us were taught an object lesson by the Palestinian movement. Again, going back to the '70s in these documents we've been studying, and even back to the '30s. Like one of the things that's coming as very popular now, most people didn't know about it, is Nassan Kanafani's book on the 1936 uprising in Palestine. So there's an entire new generation of people. I'd call them radicals, but it's increasingly common. There's nothing particularly radical about them. And then some people who've been around a lot longer, who are waking up to all sorts of realities due to this historic surge in the Palestinian freedom struggle. And I really want to make that clear to people who have, I mean, we've been watching, there's a Holocaust live stream to us every day. And people are, I mean, upset is an understatement. Like people, a lot of it's hard. How can you think about anything else when something like that, when you're watching someone who had been in a hospital that got bombed, burning alive with an IV still attached to their arm? How can you think about anything else? And how can you be anything but overwhelmed by the sense of tragedy? But there, that's true, but there is another side, which is that our imperialist ruling class and its Zionist entity are losing. That's why they are waging this genocide. They are killing women and children because their operations against the resistance have been unsuccessful so far. It's taken a year, and they can't get rid of Izzedine al-Qassam brigades or Hamas, which is an army that was built in a besieged, tiny besieged territory that the Zionists themselves control. They've not been able to beat them. They are losing. They will lose in Lebanon. They will lose against Yemen. I mean, the Zionists can't even defeat the people of Palestine. They don't stand a chance against the Arab nation as a whole. And however many Arab client regimes there are that whose bourgeoisies side with imperialism. I mean, the Zionists are driving more and more people in the region to oppose them every day. I mean, they just, what was it last week? They just bombed a Maronite neighborhood in Lebanon, a community which is more politically diverse than they're often given credit for. But Maronites are generally considered their main party is fascistic, and they're that party's a hardcore supporter of Israel. But I mean, the Zionists, they're the desperation of this failed and losing Zionist entity is bringing new people into the ranks of opposition and into the ranks of resistance every day. So I really want to just speak directly to viewers of yours, Aidan, who are on the floor with grief about this Holocaust, and they're on the floor with grief because they're sensitive, humane, and decent people, and the message needs to get out that things are so dark and things are so bad because history is at a turning point, and the oppressed people are winning. Palestine is going to win.
Right, Ty. So in terms of that desperation, it gets to what the last thing I want to talk to you about, which is the desperation of Zionists in Toronto, and Toronto police are Zionists, obviously as well, along with the Canadian state actors. So your stance on Palestinian liberation that you've explained in pretty good depth, do you think it's influenced the arrest you faced? I think it might be an obvious question, but as a journalist, I want to ask it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, Chrystia Freeland, I mean, we were there to protest the genocide, but one of the reasons I heard about this last minute, I've been accused of being an organizer. I was not an organizer. That is a credit, a compliment from the class enemy that which I cannot accept in good conscience. I heard about this thing and I canceled my plans and just about ran over there because of everything that Chrystia Freeland represents. She's the finance minister of the Trudeau regime. Of the Canadian ruling class, joined at the hip to the ruling class of the United States that exploits workers around the world and enslaves entire nations. Like Toronto is the mining center, for headquarters of the world. The Canadian ruling class exploits, like in collaboration with the United States. It exploits miners in South America, Africa, Asia, even in parts of Europe. Displaces indigenous people, poisons the land. And yeah, I mean, who epitomizes that, maybe aside from a particular CEO here and there, but coordinating and taking a responsibility and just personifying the regime that holds that all in place more so than Chrystia Freeland. And then there's the Chrystia Freeland's absolutely sickening embrace of Ukrainian neo-Nazis and Ukrainian Nazis from generations ago. Her grandfather, who she claimed to be an inspiration, she vaunted him as an inspiration, was the editor. And Aidan, you know this at least as well as anyone, and your viewers have benefited from the thoroughgoing journalism you've done exposing this creep who edited a Nazi propaganda rag in German occupied Ukraine. And Chrystia Freeland, I mean, it's under her initiative. She plays a big role in the arming of neo-Nazi brigades like Azov, who have been carrying out an ethnic cleansing in Donbass. They're not so able to do it anymore. These Nazis have been getting pumped full of Russian lead. And yeah, I mean, Chrystia Freeland, she personifies the exploitation of labor by capital in Canada and far beyond the borders. She's directly implicated in Canada's backing for this Holocaust in Gaza that's now spreading elsewhere in the Arab world. And she's directly and passionately involved in the ethnic cleansing of Donbass, where just unspeakable torture, people getting tortured and injected with adrenaline so that they don't pass out. And just the most hideous, not just unthinkable, unspeakable but unthinkable acts of sexual violence and torture committed by neo-Nazis. They're the Azov, Adar, and there's even sicker groups like Tornado. Uh, and yeah, this whole Nazi-infested regime was put in place by Canadian imperialism. Yes, just before Freeland was in power, but she's been a huge backer of it. So yeah, I mean, I'm upfront opposing all these things. I do so because it's the right thing to do. It's the moral thing to do, but it's grounded in the strategic interests of the working class and the historical necessity faced by workers to get rid of the capitalist system and liberate themselves. I mean, we can't, our people, even the unionized layers of the working class in the imperialist countries, and we're some of the best off workers in the world. We struggle at the grocery store. We struggle to put roofs over our heads. Future for, I mean, I don't have any kids, but my coworkers do, and people can't, they're struggling, we're wrestling with their children's future. And the same system that's oppressing us and making life for us impossible uh, is perpetrating these horrific crimes, the ethnic cleansing of Donbass, which now thankfully is almost over, and the ongoing Holocaust in Gaza, which is spread through the West Bank and is now extended into southern Lebanon. So yeah, to answer your question, no, I'm known as someone who's upfront about opposing these things. I mean, I get up, like, that's the cause of the working class is what keeps me going. It's what gets me up in the morning, and it's my commitment to it is what allows me to sleep at night. I mean, I've got the odd hobby here or there as a diversion, but yeah, no, I'm being targeted because of what I do. And the same thing can be said of the 90 plus other arrestees in the Toronto area. I mean, some of them are longtime activists. Others were people who were spurred into political activity. They saw a genocide going on and they didn't know what else to do but take to the streets and oppose it. And they immediately came into harm's way. They've faced the armed fist of the ruling class. That is the cops. So
All
yes, it's
right.
100% political.
All right. So the Cannon Fellows was speaking to Tynan Liebert. Now, before go, Ty, I'm going to give you an opportunity to leave a message to the audience if you have any.
Well, first I got my first message is going to be to you, Aiden, and it's a message of thanks. First off, your viewers may not know this, but I want everyone to know that Aiden came with me and a crew of trade unionists and socialists to the police station, to make sure that nothing happened when I was getting fingerprinted. So the guy you're listening to on the split screen here doesn't just talk about anti-imperialism, he really walks the walk. So Aiden, you've been very generous with me, um, responding to your questions in ways that amount to a message to your viewers. So I don't have a whole lot more to say other than, um, you know, uh, there's this view of being an activist that you're a person who's part of a certain subculture who maybe wears certain clothes or has a certain diet or does certain things. That's not what it's about. um, Organizing against the capitalist system in various ways, whether it be like to organize a union so that you can have a safer, more respectful or less disrespectful workplace, afford your groceries and housing, or whether you're organizing in the streets for the cause of Palestine. This is a basic natural thing for exploited working class people to do, taking to the street. It's not about being an activist or being part of a special club. It's just a practical and natural thing that masses of people have always done, just as a condition of survival and ultimately for their liberation. So I just encourage people who, they know what's up from watching the Canada Files and maybe some other things, but they think that organizing is not for them. Well, it is for you. Talk to your coworkers. Uh, if you don't have a union, form one. If you do have a union, get active in it. Be ready. It's a political battle, And there's a lot in the labor movement. There are a lot of blind alleys that lead you back to support for the same imperialist system we're all out there fighting. But get involved, learn the lessons, talk to people. If you live in a rental tower, talk to your neighbors, form a tenants union. Because yeah, organizing, I mean, there's a genocide going on. And though we're not up against anything nearly that bad, here, I mean, well, different people are up against different things. I mean, in many ways, the conditions of Indigenous peoples in Canada, they're very similar. There's no surprise when you go to Indigenous events, you see Palestinian flags. But I mean, even if you're not faced, under getting bombed, even if you're just struggling to pay for groceries, the sands are shifting, the tide is turning. So I just want to just let those people know that there's nothing wrong or exotic or different about talking to your coworkers and the people in your apartment building about these pressing issues. That it's difficult at first and you'll be a bit nervous, but you'll be surprised when other people come forward, that you're not alone. And you'll see them feel the same way. And once you start doing that, your life will never be the same again. So please get involved. And be sure to check out Aidan's channel. If you haven't heard the interview with Charlotte Cates, jump back. I mean, Aidan's got all sorts of great um, content. The stuff about Sami Dunes is especially important right now. And yeah, if you live in Toronto, be sure to, I mean, we're already organizing for MayDay. You'll see posters going up eventually.
All right, well, folks, again, Tynan Liebert, QB activist in the electrical trades, organizer with Communist Workers Circle, Labor MayDay Committee. Ty, thanks for speaking to the Canada Files, and Canada Files audience, thank you for making it to the end of this interview. If you want to support the Canada Files journalism, please do set up a monthly or annual donation to the Canada Files. Goodbye, folks.